Hello and welcome to the Mindful Men Podcast, a show inspiring men to be mindful about their lives. Each week, we'll dive into a range of topics that matter to men and hear from everyday people doing extraordinary things. So if you love the show, please give it a 5-star rating and share it with your mates. Now, before we get into this week's episode, please note that some of the content may trigger you. And if this happens, please reach out to your support networks. It's really important. If you can't get enough of Mindful Men, head over to our website. It's www.mindful-men.com.au. Find the show notes and the links to our socials there. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's get mindful. G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rennie, and today we're getting mindful about one of my all-time favourite discussions. It's fatherhood, and particularly today's guest is going to come on and chat about what it's like being a dad whilst also being in active military service as well. So joining me for today's discussion, I've got Queon Wilcox from Texas in the USA. How you going, Queon?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm good. Really excited about this conversation. We've probably just been talking off air about a whole bunch of dad stuff already. So looking to bring that to the podcast world. But to introduce you to the audience, you're a man of God, you're a father, you're a husband, you're the host of the Mediocre Dads podcast. So I'm going to ask you a little bit later on what a mediocre dad is.
Gotcha.
You're also a sergeant in the United States Army. So welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. I know we had one scheduled like 2 weeks ago, but then I had to reschedule and I was like, I'm going to get on the show. I know I am. So I'm excited to be here. Finally.
We booked the first one on Good Friday here in Australia. Like, my kids won't let me do anything other than probably Easter egg stuff on Easter weekend. So I've got to clear that schedule.
Oh yeah. So I did the same thing and my wife was like, Good Friday, huh? And I was like, I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking. Usually this is in April. This is still March.
I think it's just throwing everybody out this year. Like I think this is a leap year as well. So we're just like double throwing out this year. But anyway, we could talk of calendars all day, but we are here to talk about fatherhood. Whenever I talk to a dad, I like to hear the dad stats. So how many kids have you got and what are their ages?
I have 2 daughters. My oldest is 5 going on 6. She'll be 6 here in beginning of May. And then my second daughter is a year and a half and she'll be 2 in October. So.
Wow, you're right in the mix at the moment.
Oh, yeah. I want 2 more. But, we're trying, as for all my adults out there, we are practicing. So
why do you want 2 more? Like, is 2 not enough? Like, did you always have this romantic feeling that you wanted 4? Like, yeah, talk us through that.
No. So truthfully, originally I only wanted 2. And as I got older, I'm 29 going on 30 this year. As I got older, I started to realize things where I was like, 2 kids is like, okay, right? It's relatively simple as they get older, especially. But then I started to realize, I think I want more. I wanted a big family. My wife comes from a big family and they're always hanging out and whatever the case might be. So I was like, you know what? I think I do want more kids. And I have 2 daughters and they're a blessing and I love them, but I also want 2 boys. And so I am trying for 2 boys as long as I have one, because I do have a name picked out for them. And I do believe the Lord is going to bless me with this son. Because I had a weird, I won't say weird, but I had an encounter, if you will, that kind of solidified that God heard me and said, yes, I am going to give you a son named Elijah. So I am kind of, hoping that is the next son. But yeah, just 2 more boys and then maybe adopt a 5th one. So we'll see.
I'm interested on this encounter. Do you care to share what that encounter was?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I was it's called Fort Huachuca, Arizona. It's a random military base that I was doing some training at. And I just happened to walk into this. It's like a sub place that they have. And I was talking to who was the owner. Me and her got in this really deep conversation. She was telling me about her daughter and how she had a miscarriage. And I told her about how my wife had just recently gone through a miscarriage. And she was telling me how she was writing a book. And we were kind of just got deep into this conversation. And the next, in the middle of this conversation, she kind of looks at me. And it was like one of those moments where she stopped talking. She just looked at me and I'm kind of like, okay, it's kind of got really weird. And she goes, I don't know why. She goes, but I look at you and the name Elijah comes to my head. Now, keep in mind, I just met this lady. I have not told her that I have had the name Elijah picked out for my son since I was 16, 17. And it was really ever since I read how Elijah brought fire from the sky, or he prayed and brought fire, and God brought down fire from the sky. And he proved to I think it was the Pharisees or the Philistines who were, and anyway, brought fire down from the sky. And ever since I read that, I was like, that name right there is powerful. So I had that name picked out. And for her to be like, yeah, I see you and I see the name Elijah, she's like, I don't know why. And I go, and I'm racking my mind. I was like, I never told her that I had a name for my son picked out. And she said it 2 times back to back. And I was like, this is the first time that I have ever had an encounter where I really knew and understood that God was there and was watching and hearing my prayers. And so I immediately left, called my wife, called my dad, called my mom. I was like, I had this encounter. I'm going to have a son one day. I don't know what it is. Fast forward to my second daughter. So I'm in this belief. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a son. God already told me it's going to be a son. We get the balloon, we pop the balloon, and all pink confetti comes down. And there is this photo out there. I'm ashamed to show my daughter, but there's this photo where I'm just pure disappointment of just like, oh my goodness, God, I thought you were listening. What happened? What happened? It was supposed to be a son. Instead, you said it was going to be a son. But it was that, I still do believe, and I'm grateful that he gave me a second daughter, because she has taught me so much that it's helped improve my relationship with my first daughter, which I'm not saying our relationship was bad, but I was able to notice a lot of mistakes I was making. So, but anyway, that was the encounter, and that nonetheless was able to, that's why in my head, I tell people I'm going to have a son, and they're like, what do you mean? How do you know that? I was like, trust me, God's got me. So yeah.
Wow, that is an encounter. That's really special. And interesting when you're talking about the balloon popping, like this is not my story. This is my sister-in-law's story, actually. They have a son now, and they did a gender reveal at our house. We had a bit of barbecue and some family and friends over, and they had a big box of these poppers with the confetti in them, and they got a few extras just because that's just was the deal. They couldn't just get one. They had to get the whole box for some reason. And they popped it, and all the blue confetti came out, and I was like, yeah, you're having a boy. That's awesome. And that's ultimately what they had. But then my daughter and my son grabbed the other poppers and started popping them all over the backyard. And no joke, the rest of them were all pink.
Oh, wow.
And it's meant to be a box of boy confetti poppers, and just happens to be the one that they picked out of the box to pop and do the gender reveal was the right one, because the rest of them certainly were the blue color. They were all pink. So
wow. That is, look, that is God right there. He's like, listen, I don't want to confuse y'all. So listen, you grabbed the right one.
Just grab that one and just let the kids have fun with the rest of them. So, wow, that is a story. And so, like, taking you back to when you were pregnant with your first daughter, did you, like, the modern medicine that allows us to find out what the gender is before the birth? And for me, I didn't want to find out on our first. I wanted it to be a complete surprise, and I thought we were going to have a daughter. Actually, I had my gut feeling it was a daughter, but my son came out first. Did you find out before the birth that it was going to be a daughter, or was it a complete surprise to you? And how did that feel?
Oh, well, look, I got stories for days, and I never realized it until someone asked me a question. It is a funny story thinking back to it. So, when they say, hey, you got to wait till a certain amount of time, I think it's like 16 to 18 weeks where you can actually do the sonogram. They can tell you what the gender of the baby is, right? So my wife lays down, the lady pulls the thing to gel out, doing her thing, and we tell her beforehand, we're like, hey, we don't want to know what the sex of the baby is yet. We want it to be a surprise. And so she's like, okay, yeah, totally got it. She acknowledged what we said. Kid you not, 45 seconds later, she's like, oh my gosh, you guys are going to have a beautiful baby girl. So me and my wife kind of look at each other like, did we hear that right? Did we hear that correctly? And she looks at us and she's like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful girl you guys are going to have. And we're looking at her and she goes, oh yeah, you guys said you didn't want to know. Oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm just like, way to ruin like what was supposed to be like a surprise for us. Like we were going to do a whole gender review, right? And we're just sitting there and we're like, we're really happy to know it's a girl, right? But at the same time, we're really upset that you told us. And so like for the rest of the sonogram, which took like another like 5 minutes, we were just kind of like happy but bitter at the same time. Just kind of like, I want to be happy because I found out, but at the same time, she wasn't supposed to say anything and she knew it. She knew. We told her. We just got done telling her. And she's in her own world being like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful baby girl you guys are going to have. And so, yeah, that is how we got told. Like I said, we did want to do it to be a little bit of a surprise. We were going to wait and her mom was going to plan this whole thing. And so we left there. She called her mom. She's in tears and she's like, yeah, it's going to be a girl. And, because again, in their minds, we're like, we want a boy. I would say this: when you're young, usually when you talk about having kids, most people are like, I want a son, I want a son, I want a son. Especially men. I get it. We want sons to pass on our name, whatever the case might be, and someone to teach and have that bond with. But I tell you, if it's a girl, that bond is even better than I would say compared to. I don't have a son yet, so I don't know. But for me personally, that bond is stronger with my daughters than I would even figured with having a son, because my daughters rely on me so much, and I have to learn how to navigate, different aspects of it than if I have a son where I'm just like, do this because dad told you, and I'm a man, and you're growing up to be a man, so you'll figure it out. You know what I'm saying? But now daughters, there's this whole different realm of navigating that requires a more of an emotional bond, and then just that more of that, we're men, we'll figure it out type thing. You know what I mean? So it was great. It's
Yeah.
great. I'm glad I had daughters first, but yeah, that was that experience. Like I said, I have stories for days, so forgive me if I keep rambling on. But yeah, so
This is good because, like, as dads, I find, and part of the reason I started the Mindful Men podcast was to have dads on to hear the dad experience. And I remember this concept through my social work studies. I'm a social worker, and this thing around maternal gatekeeping. And I remember, like, when our son was born and he had a couple years of really bad sleep, like he would only breastfeed to sleep. I could never give him like a bottle or anything like that. It would only be my wife. And so we're trying to break that mold. And we had a sleep consultant over. And this is the first time I'd experienced it personally, or that I was consciously aware that it happened. This idea that when it comes to a mother and a child, the focus from the medical world is on the mother and the child, and the dad gets left behind. And so when that sleep consultant was over at our house, I was asking a lot of questions. I was really interested in how it all works, how I can be involved. But when she would respond, this sleep consultant, she would refer to my wife and look at my wife. And I'm like, hey, I'm over here. I'm asking the questions, but you're not even acknowledging me in the conversation. And it's through my social work studies that I identified this idea or this concept of maternal gatekeeping, and then did a bit more research. And now as a therapist, I work with a lot of guys who share similar stories. So it's important, I think, to have a platform where dads, whether they're mediocre or not, can come on and chat about fatherhood and what it all means. Like, what does it mean to be a dad? What's the war stories of fatherhood? Because we've got a lot of them. So on that note, like, when you really bring it down to what it means to you to be a dad, and yes, you're a girl dad, and maybe in the future you'll have Elijah and maybe a couple more boys. What does that mean for you to be a dad?
oh man. So it's crazy. I've thought about this question, but then I've never been able to really formulate, I think, an answer that's articulatable, but I'll do my best here. So what I will say to being a dad for me is there's a few words that come to mind, and one of them is presence. And presence is such an important aspect to me because so I was adopted. I have a twin brother, identical twin brother, and we were adopted when we were 2 years old by a white family, which it's not a bad thing. Whatever, we grew up differently, different culture, and it was great. But we had parents who cared for us and wanted to be a part of life, and wanted us to be successful in life. And so, fast forward to as I'm older now. And one of the biggest things that I realized from my dad was his presence. And we may not have seen eye to eye at times, obviously, especially when I was an adolescent and, thinking I'm a man now and I can say whatever I want. No, I could not. I really quickly realized that, just being there, just being around them, it does wonders. And so I even told this story on my podcast. So my dad flies for Southwest right now, but he has flown for several different airlines or whatever the case might be. And in the beginning, he was always gone. So he was gone for 3 to 4 weeks out of the month, right? But as when I was in middle school and high school, I played basketball, and I remember all the times he showed up to my games. And I'm talking, he would show up to away games. And these away games could be 45 minutes to an hour away, but he's still showing up. And he's coming in, and the first thing he does, he looks for me. And if I was happened to be sitting on the bench at that time, he would wave, make eye contact, let me know he was there. And immediately my personality, everything about me, my demeanor changed, because I was like, oh shoot, my dad's here. I got to make sure I don't disappoint him in any way because my dad's here. Because all these other players, their dads, maybe one or two of them are here, but my dad is here. He took time to come here knowing, even though he just got done flying, and he just got back from home from the airport, but he got in his car and he drove all the way over here to see me and watch me play. And he did that for my brother when he played football. So now, me as a dad, one of the, like I said, biggest thing is presence for my daughters is those small moments that I can, I always try to be a part of them, just to be there, right? Because I know it means the world to them that dad is there. But it kind of transitioning, if you will, like being military, I'm not able to do that all the time. And that's one of the toughest parts about being a dad is, especially in the military, is I'm not always able to be there when I want to be. And
Mm.
I miss a lot of those small moments that that to them, they're just kind of like, what, I don't know. It's just, this is, I'm just growing up. But for us as parents, we're like, oh, that was such a moment. That was such a big moment that it would have been great if both parents could be there. So presence for me is really one of those things in which I think being a dad, I can't really say what is being a dad, but I can tell you a few, using a one word, presence is the word I would use to say, hey, that's one of the best ways you can be a dad. Even if you are not able to be present in there day to day because you and mom split up for whatever reason, trying to be there as much as you can, man, it does wonders and it means the world to your kids.
I think you articulated that really nicely. That was beautiful. The way the presence. And I talk to a lot of dads about being present and wanting to be there for their kids, not wanting to work. I mean, you've got a very challenging job where you have to work away, but wanting to be there, like at the school things or the sports things or the after school things, the learning to swim, like all the little things that we often take for granted and we just do on autopilot, but actually being present and aware and consciously there and supporting is what a lot of us dads actually want. You mentioned that you were adopted. I'm interested to like your identity as a father, knowing that you were adopted out and then brought into an adoptive family. Like, has that experience, I guess, formulated into how you want to be a dad?
Yes. So I didn't realize it until I think I would say 17, 18, where people are at this point where everyone's thinking about what they want to do in college and what they want their life to be, what they want to be known for. And for me, I didn't vocalize it because I thought it was crazy to say at the time. But for me, I said, all I want to be is a dad. I want to be a dad because I want the chance to show my kids that I won't leave them and I won't abandon them. Now, when I was adopted, I wasn't necessarily abandoned, but I will say my birth parents were only 15 years old when they had me and my brother. And so tried their best, but then they weren't going to stay together. They're only 15, of course. And then between their different parents and having different things going on, it turned into a battle where it was no longer about us, it was about them. And then that led to the state saying, hey, neither of you and neither of your family members are fit to be parents of these children. And so we were put into the foster system. And then that is how we ended up getting adopted. But I remember as a kid, I would cry for my mom. So like I would get in trouble with my adopted parents, right? And I only use that just to kind of give the distinction. For me, they're my parents, but I remember I'd get in trouble with my adopted parents and I would sit there and they would send me to my room and I would be crying. And all I'd be thinking about is, I want my mom, I want my mom, I want my mom. Because I was 2, so there was still that, or at this point I was older, but I was 2 when we had left. But there was still that emotional connection of knowing that I have a mom and she's out there, and there's someone who used to hold me and care for me, right, as the best way she could. And so I would always say I want my mom. And then as I got older, I stopped saying I want my mom, and it would be like, where's my parents at? And that was now who my adopted parents were. So now for me, like I said, when I turned 17, I was like, all I want to be is a dad, and I want to be the best dad I can be because I never want my kids to think that I didn't love them or they have to go do this extensive Google search to figure out who I am and why I wasn't there. And was it their fault or was it not their fault? Did extenuating circumstances happen? Whatever the case might be, because I didn't find out what happened until I was 16 years old. But from the time I was 2 to 16, I had lived my life in the complete darkness of just like, I had this packet on, they described who I am, but like, I don't know who my parents are. I have names and, I could research them, but I don't know what they look like. I mean, they were 15. They obviously look completely different. Like, you can do a Facebook search, but that name's probably going to come up several times. For me, it was just being the best dad I could be, always being the best dad. And no matter what, it doesn't matter what my job is, doesn't matter what I have going on, being like my dad, where it's like, hey, he's present, I'm going to be there. And so that was what it was for me. And that's what it turned into for me, was like, being a dad is more important than going to work a 9 to 5 and saying like, well, if I don't stay an hour longer, I'm going to miss out on this potential promotion. What? Forget the promotion. My kids are at home waiting for me. They're the whole reason I do any of the work that I do. Why would I give this work an extra hour? And sometimes I will, don't get me wrong, right? But especially in those important moments where it's like, they're the whole reason I'm doing this. So I cannot forget what my why is. So therefore, I'm not going to sit here and worry about work. I'm going to go back to home and cherish the kids, the whole reason I'm doing this for. So yeah, so it did have an impact. And that's why ultimately led to being a dad, and then which ultimately led to Mediocre Dads.
So you're 17 and telling yourself all you want to do is be a dad, but then you end up in the US military.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Talk us through, like, did that come straight out of high school? Like, where did that come in? And I'm interested because it's going to influence the conversation a bit later on about how you navigate military life with fatherhood. So, yeah, how did the military stuff come into your life?
Well, it was it's crazy. So junior year in high school, which is again the point I'm 17 years old, and my dad, I remember me and my brother come home from school. We're getting ready to walk inside. My dad walks out and he closes the garage door, and it's just us three sitting in front of in the driveway. And we could tell we're like, oh crap, this is about to be like a serious conversation. And he says to us, he says, hey, I've noticed your guys' grades aren't great, because me and my brother at this point, we were more concerned about hooligans and people liking us than actually focusing on our grades. And we were in sports, but we weren't that good enough to make it anywhere collegiate or professionally. And so he comes out and he says, hey, have you guys ever thought about joining the military? He goes, your junior year is coming to an end, and you're about to go into your senior year, but you don't really have a plan on what you're going to do. You haven't applied to any colleges. Most colleges probably wouldn't even take you because your guys' GPAs are too low. And so, you can get into community college, but then you have to try to walk on, and you're going to be competing with a lot of different people. So he was doing his best to articulate, hey, I love you and I'm glad you guys love sports, but you guys lack the commitment and dedication needed to make it at a collegiate level. So therefore, I'm trying to help you, push you in a direction in which you would best be served in. Now, his dad was in the Air Force and he flew fighter jets and all that. And so he was a captain in the Air Force, and he did the military. And his brother, one of my dad's brothers, was also in the Air Force as well. So that's why he had broached that conversation of joining the military. We laughed in my dad's face when he asked this question. He's like, have you thought about joining the military? And we're like, no, absolutely not. Laughed in his face, walked away. Kid you not. Yeah, obviously, here I am in the military now. But we get to my senior year, and me and my brother, it was almost like it was like a twin thing. It just kind of clicked where we were like, we might need to join the military. And so we go back to my dad and we say, hey, this military thing, can you go to the recruiter with us? And if we're going to do it, we want to join the Air Force, not any of the other branches. I'm not in the Air Force, by the way. I am in the Army. So it didn't work out. Talked to the Air Force recruiter. Air Force meets their quota early on in the year. So they kind of try to string us along, but it didn't work. After a while, me and my brother lost interest. And so we started talking to the Army, and the Army was like, hey, we're always wanting to take people. And me and my brother, we're pretty relatively fit dudes. And at the time we were both in sports, so we were fit guys. And so they were like, yes, we will gladly take you. High school, getting ready to graduate. Oh yeah. And so I remember I graduated high school, and then I kind of put it off because I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to do that, because, maybe that sounded like an idea. I go back to the recruiter, and they're like, hey, yep, you got the job that you wanted, and we can have you out here in a month. And I was like, sounds good. I guess I'm going to do it. So I signed the paper and I did it, and I turned 19. And then a week later, I was on a plane headed to South Carolina, or Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and joined the military. And then from there, it just kind of took off. My brother joined a little bit later, and I never imagined it was going to be a career. But then now I'm at 10 and a half, or 10 and some change, and going on 11. And I'm like, I have 9 more years until I can officially retire. So I'm riding this out. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how it happened. But like I said, I have a story for everything. I didn't know they were to be stories of my life, and these experiences would be able to turn into this story of like, of how it happened, but like that is how it happened. Where I'm like, gosh, it's amazing how I went from here to here, and I never even saw it coming. So
it's interesting that your chosen career, because we had Anzac Day here in Australia yesterday, actually, the day we're recording. Anzac Day is the day that we remember Australian and New Zealand military personnel over all the different military operations that we've been a part of. Yeah, we celebrate. It's almost like Remembrance Day, but for Anzacs. And I was thinking about previous wars that we've been in, Australia particularly, and New Zealand, and conscription, and particularly the World War One, World War Two. And if you're a guy, you're a certain age, off you go to war. And I'm thinking that because of what's happening over in the Middle East and what's happening in Europe at the moment and so forth. And there's a bit of the China influence into the Pacific as well. And I'm like, oh, are we ever going to go to that World War III? And what happens if that conscription happens again? And my dad hat came on. I'm like, I'm not going anywhere because I've got two beautiful kids that I want to be part of their life, and going into like an armed forces type role would scare the hell out of me, because are we going to war? And I'm interested, like, for someone who's chosen that career path, like, were you drawn to that kind of the excitement maybe of going to conflict, or have you been to conflict? What was that experience like for you?
when I joined, I didn't want a combat role, so I chose a administrative role, and I was processing paperwork. And it's funny, when the recruiters or anybody else would see me, their initial thought was like, oh yeah, this guy's going to go be 11 Bravo, which is our infantry. He's going to, crack some skulls, if you will. And they would ask me like, hey, so are you 11 Bravo? And I was like, no, I'm a 42 Alpha, which is a administrative, like I said, the administrative role. And they were like, what? Stop messing with us. I was like, no, I want nothing to do with that combat role or combat lifestyle. God has a plan for everybody. And, oddly enough, I go to my first duty station, which is in Fort Hood, Texas, essentially down the road from where I am now, 2 hours down the road. And 2015, they say, hey, we're going to Afghanistan. And they say, you're going. And I was like, okay, I'm ready. I want it. At this time, I don't have kids. Now I have a few friends who do have kids. And I immediately was like, if I had kids, I wouldn't go. I would be like, I would figure out a way to get out. I wouldn't go. But I was like, hey, I'm going to go. So in 2016, I deployed to Afghanistan, spent 9 months in Afghanistan. And the first 3 months, I tell everybody, being in the Middle East and being deployed in a combat zone, the first 3 months were probably 3 of the worst months of my life, because being afraid for your life in that way, where you could just, you never know when reality, like the bomb is going to drop. You know what I mean? And so, and be the one, it's a mortar round, but you never know when that mortar round's going to drop and be the one to potentially take you out. So the first 3 months were really rough, but then after that, it's really weird. And this might sound dark, like as I need help, but I promise, if you talk to any person who's been deployed into a combat zone, such as Afghanistan or Iraq, they'll tell you after a while, the mortar rounds, you kind of get used to them. Well, you hear the siren and you're like, bam, 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 and it says incoming, incoming, incoming. And depending where you are, you'll sit there for a second and you'll be like, all right, cool. I guess it wasn't my time. And you'll just go about your day. And that's what it turned into. I tell people that and they're like, you got used to bombs being dropped on you, essentially? I'm like, yeah, as weird as it sounds, yes. Yes, I did. I slept through a lot of them. Like my roommate busted down the door. He's like, hey, we're getting mortar attacked. I'm like, you see me? I'm going back to bed. Look, if it's my time, it's my time. And I rolled over and I just went back to sleep. You know what I mean? Like that was like, I was so into, like, I was like, hey, we're here. We've been here for some time now. I'm good, man. Like if it's my time, it's my time. 9 times out of 10, guess what? It's not. And I'm good, But yeah, that combat, going to deploying, I didn't want to when I first joined. And then as I went through basic training in AIT, I said to myself, like, okay, I have certain goals in the Army that I want to achieve before I get out. And one of them was deploying. And I was like, because I want to be able to say that I joined and I did something, and I didn't join and just be like, yeah, I was at Fort Hood and then I got out and that's just kind of my story and that's it. I didn't want that to be my story. So I wanted to deploy, and I knew there was an opportunity, a potential to deploy, and I did. Came back and I was like, whew, okay. I would do it again, but differently. Now I have daughters, and everything that's going on in the world, even with our withdrawal from Afghanistan, I tell people, I'm like, I don't know what it is with America's infatuation with the Middle East, but we're probably going back to the Middle East. And I tell people, I was like, hey guys, get your mind right. And I'm trying to prepare my soldiers about, hey, what that potentially looks like. I'm not saying, hey, we are going to war and we're going over there, but like as you watch the news, you watch around, that's kind of the potential reality of it. So I try to tell my guys like, hey, try to prepare your minds for what that's going to look like. Try to prepare as much as you can. Talk to your families, talk to your loved ones, especially if you're married or you have kids, or whatever the case might be, and try to prepare them as much as possible for that day. You might potentially get a call and say, hey, we have 72 hours to get our bags packed and get on a plane and leave. So that is the potential reality of being in the military. And my wife, me and her have had this discussion a few times already, and she doesn't want me to go, obviously, but she understands that because I chose this profession, there is I wouldn't say a thrill about it, but there is a part of me that is bound by duty and honor to do and protect and serve my country as what I signed up for, and defend the Constitution of the United States in whatever that form of fashion that looks like. So
those conversations with your wife, have they always been civil, or have they been hostile? Have they been difficult conversations to have with her?
they're difficult because I can tell she wants to support me. And it's kind of like right now we doing a podcast, right? And as I told you we're in a hotel room and they went and get some food, right? For an extended period of time. It's kind of like, hey, I want to be supportive of you, but at the same time, I'm frustrated with you because I don't want to lose you. And I don't want to, it's stupid that you have to potentially go. And so it's a battle, right? Because she wants to be supportive, but she also wants to be able to express, hey, I don't want you to go. I don't want you to be in danger. I want you to stay. And so there are times where she starts crying, and I know that's what she's feeling, and I know that's what's going on with her. And she's just like, hey, do you have to go? Is there not anybody else that could go? Because when I deployed the first time to Afghanistan, one of the guys that I went to church with, we went to the same church, and we served on the support team, or like like the church security. We helped out a little bit. And, we deployed, and he didn't come back. He had 4 kids, and one of them was extremely young. I think it was like 6 months old. And so he didn't come back. And, it was rough because, processing paperwork for him, because that was my job at the time. My job's different now, but processing the paperwork, and his picture comes up on my screen as this is the person in which has passed away or been killed in action. And I'm like sitting there in shock because I'm like, I know this guy. Like I talked to him a month before we deployed, about deploying, and how excited he was and whatever the case might be. And I was just like, wow, this is really rough. So now fast forward, she's seeing, the church be supportive of his wife and all the things and all these, and the things they're doing for her and whatever the case might be. And, but, the realization of like, that could be me. Like, we could be in the point where we have 4 kids like I want. Right. And then next thing you know, I'm not coming home. And she's like, I have 4 kids I have to do with by myself. And how do I tell them that dad's not coming home? So it is a rough conversation. It's not an easy conversation to have. And, as much as she wants to be supportive, I have to realize, and you're a social worker, so you kind of understand, like, you have to pay attention to things that are not being said, reading body language to say like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but what are you not saying that stands out, that really probably just are telling me what you want to say or how you really feel. And so that is what, part of the conversation where I have to kind of console her and be like, hey, listen, I only got 9 more years, or if you don't want me to stay in, I can get out, but like, these are the cons of me getting out, but these are the pros of me getting out. So what does that look like? And that kind of leads down that rabbit hole of staying in or getting out. So
I was going to ask that, like, when you became a dad, did that have you second guessing and thinking maybe I should jump out, or did it just solidify that, you're on the right path, got 9 years until you're retired and all that type of stuff? How did becoming a dad influence those discussions?
I'd be very frank with you. Initially, I wanted to get out. And I used to tell people all the time, like, the moment I become a dad, I said, I'm getting out of the Army. I was like, because I cannot imagine deploying or going somewhere and having kids and leaving them for some time and potentially not being able to come back to them. So I was like, oh yeah, the moment I have kids, I'm getting out. But again, God works in mysterious ways. When I had my first daughter, I was in this weird predicament where it was like, I'm actually can't get out because I'm not necessarily stuck, but like where I'm at in my life is, if I were to get out, I would be doing a disservice to my wife and my unborn child of getting out and not being prepared for what that looks like. And so when I was in Afghanistan, I re-enlisted for 4 years. And then when I came back, you know, anybody who's been gone along from a long period of time from their significant other, you can imagine what that looks like. That's when we found out. It was actually on our anniversary. That's when we found out she was pregnant. And then from that moment, I started thinking, I was like, oh no, I can't get out. You know, like I wouldn't be able to financially support my wife. My father-in-law and my dad would have to, you know, financially support us until I could find a job. And then I was like, finding a job, what would that look like? I don't even know what that looked like. I hadn't even thought about that, you know? And so I was like, you know what? I talked to her about it. She's like, no, I think you should stay in. But then that led to signing another contract and another contract. And now here I am where it's like, I could get out in 2028 and I'd be at 14 years. But she knows like, hey, what's 6 more years? He gets full benefits of retirement and potentially making $7,000 to $8,000 a month that are tax free for disability and retirement. And so we're not necessarily hanging out. I could go work at Lowe's and be just fine. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where the conversation went and where I am now, where it's like, I would get out if there were an opportunity that would better serve me and my family.
It is a interesting conversation to have because as we become adults and we start adulting and then we have families, so then we start being dads and parents, we have to look at providing for our families. Are we the breadwinner, for example, or are we in maybe a dual income family where we're supporting each other? And what happens if part of that income disappears because we decide to go on a different tangent? And also the future, you know, you getting to that retirement age, like the financial benefit for you and your family is a significant carrot to dangle in front of you. And so it's something that we have to look at, even if we're not really like absolutely 110% in that role, whether that role is in the military or in anything, working at Lowe's or Macca's or wherever you're working as a social worker, sometimes we have to look at that. And that keeps a lot of guys going. They keep them in professions that they know it's a tough slog. And so how tough is it being a working dad in the military and being away from your family for periods of time?
It's really hard. So in 2022, I went to Kuwait for 5 months. And at this point, so I have my oldest daughter who's, I think she was 3 or 4 at the time, or 3 going on 4. And I've missed 2 of her birthdays already. My wife is pregnant with our second daughter at this point, and I'm in Kuwait, and Kuwait's not a dangerous place, but with my new job within the Army, it requires a lot of secrecy and a lot of things I can't even tell her about, right? Where it was like, okay, my orders do say Kuwait, but I very quickly found out that I could be in Iraq when I got there. And so I was like, oh man, like I don't mind going to a combat zone, but geez, another one. You know, I've been to Afghanistan. I don't really have any ambition going to Iraq, but like if that's what was required of me, that's what I will do. But it's very hard. Fortunately for me, I was able to stay in Kuwait, and I would remember every single night I'm FaceTiming them. But what they don't tell you is, you know, you get these little internet pucks or whatever, so you have internet service, and so you can call FaceTime or call your family or whatever the case may be. But that's every military service member out there, so it interferes with towers. The service is not that great. You have to stay up super late to make these phone calls. So it was 11 o'clock midnight in Kuwait, and it was morning/mid afternoon for them. And I'm making these phone calls to them. So I have, optimal service, and then they can see me and I can see them. We can have a conversation. And trying to parent from thousands of miles away is very difficult because they see me on the screen, but especially when, my wife needs that help, in a form of discipline, but not necessarily that I'm not there to discipline them. Just, hey, almost scare them. You know what I mean? And she's like, talk to your daughter. And I'm talking to her, but you could tell just like, hey, it doesn't have the same impact as if I was there. And so it's very hard. And, she's asking me, when are you coming home? And it's hard to explain to her like, hey, I just got out here, so I'm not coming home anytime soon. And, she's like, oh, okay, really disappointed. And I feel like I let her down, because I'm like, hey, I want to come home so bad, but, I can't, like, you know what I mean? I'm stuck here until that allotted time. And then again, you're trying to help, but then you go over the top sometimes. At least I would go over the top, and I was doing more damage than I was actually helping. And so you could just see and hear my wife be like, okay, that's not what I wanted, and just quickly hang up. And then, 20 minutes would go by, call me back and be like, I need you to just say something, and you went over the board. And she's not going to respond to well. She's like, I'm calling you, and all you're doing is yelling at her over the phone when she misses you and she's acting out because she misses you and she doesn't understand why you're gone. And so that was the hard part. The hardest part was like, I'm over here trying to thinking like, okay, being a dad means I got to be an enforcer and set standards, right? As if my kids are in the military with me. But in reality, it's just they miss you, and you have to figure out that balance of like, hey, I understand you're upset. I understand you're acting out. And I understand, it's not ideal for you. But what is it that would help, right? Would it help if me and you just had our own FaceTime dates, if you will, and we just kind of talked? Or would it help if, if every week dad sent you a card and mom read you what the card said and, just very personal thing, right? Like what would help to get you that understand that dad's gone. He doesn't want to be gone away from you. It's not intentional, but there is value to me being gone because I am making a little bit more money than I would usually would. And when I do come back, I'm going to have time to actually spend with you. So when I did come back, I remember coming down the little escalator thing or whatever you will and seeing them, and they hadn't seen me yet, but I'm just kind of seeing them and watching. And I'm seeing my daughter run around. My wife's waddling around trying to calm her down because she's super excited. She has this sign and they don't see me yet when I'm watching. And all I'm thinking is like, I'm about to start crying because I'm like, this is all I've been waiting for is to see them. And she's so much bigger than when I left. And now I'm like sitting here and I'm like, I miss so many things. And so when I see her and she sees me, she's like, Dada. And she runs over to me. She has a sign, super excited, and she's crying because she's like overwhelmed with emotions, and I'm hugging them, kissing them both. And I'm just like, I never want to leave you guys again. But I said that at the time, but knowing in the back of my mind, I'm lying to myself because I'm like, I'm probably gonna have to leave again. And it's gonna suck because then I'm gonna miss even more. So
That just shows that you're human, that you have those experiences. And we go into the, I don't want to leave again, but then the rational brain comes in, well, you're probably going to have to leave again. And so you've highlighted some really good techniques there of around like the letters and stuff like that to your family. Like what did you do actively to maintain your well-being when you're away outside of those conversations? Because I guess it's probably playing on your mind during the day as well, like not being with your family.
it was the gym. The gym became my best friend again. And for me, it sounds cliche because most of the time, the people I deal with are military folks, right? But anytime we deploy, that's probably the time of our life where we're gonna get the most fittest we've ever been, is because we spend a lot of time working out because that is an outlet in which allows us to throw around heavy weight, get angry, or kind of be upset, if you will, but also be content, just saying, "Hey, I'm doing something." And so, I spend a lot of time in the gym. I got on the point. So, what I learned from Afghanistan was I need to start a regiment. So, what that turned out to be for me was 10 o'clock at night. I would call my wife, talk to her about 10 minutes, say, okay, how everything going? Let them get their day get started. I would go work out. Once I was just done working out, I would come back, I would shower and change, and I would talk to them for about an hour. By this time, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and I get in bed, take some melatonin, and I would zonk out, wake up at around 8:30. Yeah, 8:30 in the morning, and go to work, do what I was supposed to do it all over again. And I do that every day. And then the days turns into weeks turns into months. And next thing I know, they're like, hey, it's time for you to go.
You must have been exhausted. Like that sounds exhausting. I mean, fatherhood is exhausting in itself, but that sounds like next level.
In a lot of ways it was, but like I think I said this in the beginning, is they're my reason why. I tell people whenever you're doing something, men are best driven when they have a purpose. And so my purpose in my life are my kids and my wife. And so I'm willing to sacrifice sleep and money and whatever it costs to show them that I'm there and being present with them as much as I can. And so it was exhausting for me, but I didn't care. I was like, I get to talk to my daughter and she was happy about that. I got to talk to my wife and she was happy about that. And so, exhausting as much it may be, I was like, no, like they're the reason why. They're my reason why. They're my purpose. And so, my purpose is so powerful for me that I'm like, there might be other consequences, but I'll face them later. My back might hurt now, but I'm willing to freaking break my back if I have to, if that means their happiness and their joy to know that my dad tried. So it was tiring. Trust me, it was. But they're like I said, they're my reason why. And I tell everybody the reason I wake up every morning at 5 o'clock, put on my uniform and drive 30 minutes into work every day and have a willingness to lead people and be impactful as much as I can is because I have 3 girls waiting for me at home who, if I failed, wouldn't want to say it that, hey, dad, you disappoint us, but knowing I would disappoint them and I wouldn't be able to support them like I am now.
Question comes into mind is in terms of you've got powerful stories and multiple facets of your life, from being adopted quite young to military life to fatherhood. What's taught you more about yourself? Is it the military or is it fatherhood and being a girl dad?
Oh, I would definitely say it's a mixture of both, but between the two, it was being a girl dad. Because like I said, raising girls, it requires a finesse that's different, like we have this idea in our minds, especially when we're not dads yet, or especially when you're a new dad, about how we can raise our sons, how we're going to raise them to be tough, right? We want them to be tough and want them to be able to take care of themselves sooner rather than later because we don't want them to feel the pain of the world as we did. We want to kind of, limit the force, if you will. With girls, it's the same, where you don't want them to experience the negative or the sad parts of the world, but you try to hold off as long as possible. But you can't be as forceful with them as you would with your son. And so there's a finesse that you have to go be about it, because if you're too forceful, then it's just like, dad seems like he's angry at me all the time. And so one of the things I learned about myself immediately was, oh man, I'm really quick to get angry. And it's not even I'm angry at them. I'm just angry with the thing that's happening. And so I had to quickly check myself. My daughter would do something and my initial reaction, I could feel the anger bubbling up and I'm ready to like, rah, 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 rah. And I would be like, hold on. I can't do that. Take a deep breath. All right. And I started teaching her, because she saw me freak out one too many times, where now she's having her own version of that. And when I saw that, I was defeated, because I was like, I failed my daughter. She's 4 or 5 years old and I failed her, and she's already picked up on habits that I never imagined her to pick up on. And so now I had to change and correct myself. And now I have to come at everything with a lot more patience and being more sensitive to her, to show her like, hey, you don't need to be like dad. Like, I love that you want to be like dad, but I'll be very frank, dad's a fuck up. You know what I mean? Like I'm not perfect, and it might seem like I have I have it all figured out, but like we are superheroes to our kids, and then in our heads we're the villains the entire time. And we're sitting here and we're like, man, I'm the villain of the story, but our kids are like, nah, man, you're Superman. I could call you like, and you would save the day, but we're over here like, nah, man, I'm the Joker. I'm just trying to keep it all together. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to fake the funk. And so I have learned so much from my daughter by seeing certain things, attributes in her, characteristics in her, that I'm like, she got that from me and I didn't never want her to get that. So now I have to fix it. Now I have to change that. So being a dad has taught me so much about myself, where I'm like, okay, that side of me, absolutely not. Cussing is a big part of it, right? Where I remember my daughter said one of her first few words was the F word. And I was like, absolutely not changing that, dropping that. Like, I was mad at myself, because in the military culture, all we do is cuss. Like we're always cussing. Every other word out of our mouth is like F word this, F word that. And so then for her to hear her say it and think it's funny and cute, I was like, part of it is, but at the same time, like, no, no, absolutely not. So I had to change how I talk. I had to change how I conducted myself and make sure that when she did hear words, she heard words that she doesn't understand. Like, meaning like, I want her to have a very large vocabulary. So like I'm using words that she doesn't understand, but she's hearing them often enough where she tries to use them herself. And I'm like, that's my goal. So I had to change it up. But yeah, I learned a lot from being a girl dad, especially about myself, because you start to realize a lot of your failures more than your successes. And speaking of the devil, hey, sweetie.
Speaking of, yes.
Not the devil.
That's
but
amazing.
The beautiful angel.
I think you said it really perfectly there, in terms of we can be our own worst enemies, and we can think that on the outside we're portraying the strong dad who's got it all together, but on the inside we're really tearing ourselves down. And I'm interested, is this where Mediocre Dads, the podcast, came about, like wanting to share those stories, or where did the podcast inspiration come from?
Yes, it did. It came from one of my biggest failures as a dad, as a husband, and that was I failed a drug test in the military, and it was for Delta 8. I don't know if you're familiar with what Delta 8 is, but it has THC in it. I failed my drug test, and there was a potential that I was going to get kicked out of the military. I had always wanted to start a podcast, and I just didn't really know what I was going to be about because I enjoyed talking. Well, they keep me in the military. Fast forward to February of 2023. I'm sitting there and thinking to myself, like, you know what? I almost had a big blunder where I let my family down completely. And I was like, being a dad is so important to me. I never want to fail them again. So then I'm like, okay, I've always wanted to start a podcast, so I'm going to do it. And so the first thing that came up was like fatherly teachings. I was like, oh yeah, it's going to be fatherly teachings. And my wife laughed at me. She was like, that sounds a little tacky. And I was like, yeah, but it's the best I could come up with. I lack imagination, And so I was sitting there, and I remember one day, I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was the voice of God, or maybe, but I just remember saying to myself, mediocre dads. And I don't know why. It just came to me. And so I was like, that's perfect. So I told my wife, I was like, yeah, mediocre dad. She's like, that sounds better, I guess. And then for me, it just stuck. I was like, nope, that's going to be it. I know that's it. Mediocre dads. And so I did it. And I remember I was kind of building the platform, if you will, and of what was going to be my slogan was going to be. And like I said, it all just kind of came natural for me at the point where I remember saying, being mediocre is a choice and you have to refuse to be mediocre. And so I was like, that's it. Perfect. Mediocre dads is it. That's the title. That's the slogan. That is my thing. And so from there, that's what it's been. Mediocre dads, where it's kind of a play on words where I tell people, they're like, mediocre dads, like, wow, that's interesting. Are you saying like suck at being a dad? I don't understand. Like, what are you talking about? Where I'm like, nah, like, no, really, I just try to tell people, it's like, every day we can approach being a dad half-ass if we want. We can half-ass and just be like, yeah, just another monotonous day of doing what we're going through the motions. Or we can say, nah, man, yesterday I sucked at this, this, and this. All right, bet. I need to change that and I need to improve here. Accountability of yourself and saying, okay, where did I not necessarily fail, but where can I do better? Where can I be better at? And that's where mediocre dads kind of came from me, where it was like, I'm sure there are so many dads out there who feel, like I said, they feel like the villain of their story, but then their kids are like, no, you're a superhero. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to start a podcast. I want to talk to dads. I want to talk to other dads. I want to tell my story. I would discredit my story a lot, especially about being adopted and being in the military. And then I start telling my story and people are like, oh my gosh, like that's so good. Like, you have so much, like so much experience that you can share. And I'm like, oh, I don't really don't see it that way. I just this has just been my life. But, from there, like, that's what it's been. And I've enjoyed sharing my story. I've enjoyed telling people about my blunders, my failures, but also my successes and what that looks like, and especially the look on your kids' faces when they see the success that you have and that it brings. That for me now, mediocre dads is one of those things where it's like, it's holding me accountable to make sure that I can be the best dad I can every single day.
And it's so needed, like dads hearing it from dads about dadding, all the ups and downs, the messy stuff, the great stuff. It's really important so that we also, as dads, don't feel alone in our fatherhood journey, that we can go, if Queon's doing that or Simon's feeling that, like, I can feel it too. And so it is a great platform. I'll put the link in the show notes for people to check it out. And I do highly recommend people checking it out, because if anything from this episode, you can gather that you love a good chat. And I'm sure you've got many, many, many more stories that you can share with the world. So first of all, thank you for coming on. Thank you for your service as well. And thank you for juggling fatherhood and military life. But Queon, the last thing I'd like to ask all my guests is to plug something that makes them feel good. And the reason I do that is because we do go into some topics that can be triggering for people, or they can be a little bit dark, or can be a little bit down. So I like to lift us up right at the end and making everyone feel good. So something you're either watching on telly, you're listening to, you're reading, a self-care activity, something you're doing with your daughters. What's lighting you up at the moment?
Man, to be very frank with you, is I read my Bible every day. And it's something that I got back into, getting back into my faith, especially. So I was raised to be a Christian, but as I got older, I was like, I'm going to do my own thing, whatever the case might be. But anyway, same time last year, I started my podcast. I made a commitment to get back into reading my Bible every day. And so one thing that helps me so much is I read my Bible every day, and it's the New Living Translation daily Bible, right? To finish the Bible in a year. And man, I say it all the time. It's funny how God works because he works in mysterious ways. And that might sound cryptic, but then when it happens to you, you're like, that's not cryptic at all. That's just how you describe it. Where now I will reading something and I'm like, wow, that resonates with me so well that I can't even thank you, God. Like, how did you know? Like, this was always planned. Like, did you plan this to happen in my life right now where I was reading this? So like, for me, like it's reading my word every day and getting really into tune with that to apply the biblical teachings that I can to my life and to my kids. So
it's the bringing the spiritual into the physical and the emotional and the psychological as well. It's often the spiritual side of us is disregarded in our life's journey, where we think of how well somebody is doing, don't necessarily look at that spiritual side. So I love how you brought that in. It's really the first person to talk about that, I think, in some depth. So thank you. But Queon, thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for sharing your stories. I have loved our chat. I probably could talk to you for the next 6 hours, but I'm mindful that your family have vacated that room and now they're back and they're ready to have some dad time. So I'll leave it there. But thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode, and I hope you got some value from it. If anything triggered your mental health today, please reach out to your support networks. Also, if you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your mates. For more from Mindful Men, you can check us out on Instagram and YouTube, and I'll throw the links to these pages in the show notes below. But until next time, stay mindful.